Welcome back, everybody. Birds 365. Bill Colarulo joining us in for Jody McDonald, in for John McMullen. My name is Mark Farzetta, and joining us right now from 97.3 ESPN South Jersey, 2009 Sportscaster of the Year, if I'm not mistaken, Mike Gill joining us. What's up, Mike?
I didn't have gray in my beard back then, Mark.
You know, Jody accuses me of dyeing my beard. I do not dye my beard. I will dye my beard one day, but not yet. I'm getting a couple of the whites in there. Just getting a couple.
I've never gone that route, but that's a lot of work, man. To do that every day, or how often I don't know how often you would have to do it to keep a good shine in that beard, but it's a nice beard you got going.
Thank you very much. I'll get the salt and pepper going. Hey, the big story from training camp yesterday, Mike, was the fact that there was a Derek Barnett and Landon Dickerson shoving match, apparently, over a hit. We started our conversation, Bill and I, by me making the declaration that whenever I see a hit like this, whenever I see a little tussle at training camp before the first preseason game, it warms my heart. What's your reaction to it, Mike?
That's when we know that training camp is time to end, right? We get so jacked up for the start of football. We were talking about this. I had McMullen on my show the other day, and I said, if we reach the point of training camp where you're already tired and ready for the season to start, like, we want football back so bad, and then the monotony of these practices become, just get me to September. You know, I'm down the shore, man. We don't want the summer to end, but the fight at training camp is the first sign of this is taking too long. Get us to the games matter. Keep in mind, they play Saturday night, and then on Monday, the Browns are coming here. They're going to be doing those joint practices, which now have become more important than the actual games. So how much playing time are guys going to play Saturday night that then need to bang bodies again on Monday and Tuesday, or whenever the Browns, I think the Browns are getting here Monday. They play Thursday night. So they're going to do a couple joint practices and then play Thursday. So we have reached a point where how much is too much, even with 3 preseason games, the way these joint practices have become almost bigger than the actual games.
What's up, Mike? It's nice to meet you too, man. I don't think we've ever met before.
Cheers.
So does it concern you, though, that the player involved in the training camp fight is Derek Barnett, who has more career penalties than he does sacks in the NFL?
Yeah, no, that's the one thing that was brought out a lot yesterday. Who's surprised that it was Derek Barnett? Quite frankly, how many people remembered that Derek Barnett was even on this roster? And what kind of role can we even envision for Derek Barnett? Look, when they brought him back last year, I was willing to take a 1-year flyer to kind of see, hey, he was a first-round pick. Maybe he's a guy that matures a little late, and then he gets hurt. So we don't know. Does he mature as a player a little bit late? Because it seems like he's still has been a guy who has killed this team with penalties in the past, and he's the guy that's in the middle of it all right now. And quite frankly, is the juice worth the squeeze with him? Probably not. And you wonder, is there one of those young guys that is standing behind him just kind of waiting to take that role? Because what kind of role, how big of a role is Barnett going to have, and what kind of message would it send that, hey, this guy was a first-round pick, we signed him to some money, but he's not getting it done, we're moving on. And that would be something that championship level organizations, that's the kind of move they make.
Mike, you mentioned the conversation you had with John McMullen. I heard that. Were you, I don't know if I caught it in your voice or not, when he said Kenny Gainwell is RB1 right now and it's not close.
Yeah.
What were you as surprised as I was to hear that?
I was. I literally was like, wait a second. Did I just hear what I thought I heard? Because, you know, he has not been the guy. I thought the interesting part was, and then he followed it up because I asked about Swift, and he said, well, Swift seems to be more in the third down role, and it almost seems like they just have swapped spots, that Gainwell has moved up, and Swift would take the old Gainwell role. But, yeah, I was pretty surprised to hear that, and I think, you know, for me, I've talked about this a lot, that I find it hard to believe that if Rashad Penny's healthy and you're watching him at practice, that you wouldn't say, this guy's the best guy we got. If Gainwell has flashed that much, that's a pretty exciting comment from John, because now I don't know how much the Eagles trust Penny's health and they're just trying to keep it slow with him. Penny came out and talked about he feels like he has, you know, the weight down, and the weight problem has been why he's gotten hurt, because he's carrying so much on his legs and ankles. He broke his leg. He tore his ACL. So I think Penny is such an interesting story. But if Gainwell's at the top, that must mean they went from last year where they didn't trust him a lot at all to then giving him some more trust in the biggest games of the year and then carrying that trust over to this season, which is pretty cool. And they got a talented running back room. But if Gainwell's the most talented, what does that say about how talented that room is?
Yeah, but what do you think? I mean, Kenny Gainwell's 5'9", 200 pounds. I know that in Nick Sirianni's career, offensive coordinator in Indianapolis, they've always had a lead back who got a majority of the carries. They had Marlon Mack, Jonathan Taylor, and then 2 years in Philadelphia, it's been Miles Sanders. But even if Kenny Gainwell is the quote-unquote starter, do you think we're going to see any running back get a lion's share of the carries, or is this really going to be a running back by committee?
That's an interesting, thought, Bill, because they did have Sanders for 2 years, and you talked about his history here. What does Nick Sirianni? Because I think Sirianni does have some say in the way that he wants some things. We've kind of heard that from him. Like these guys are going to call their game, but they're going to call it kind of the way that I want to see it done. So he kind of hinted at earlier in training camp at one of the press conferences that, yeah, we want to try to find a Miles Sanders, but is that definitive? Is there not a guy on this roster that is the guy? Look, keep in mind, I think Eagles fans remember Swift had a big game against them. Week 1, he had like 144 yards. He had a huge game. He didn't have a game close to that the rest of the season. So is he a lead kind of back? Probably not. Like by the middle of the year, he had some injury problems in Detroit last year, but by the time he got back, he had kind of been like third or even fourth on their depth chart. There's a reason that Detroit was willing to kind of move on from him. I know that the running back position is a weird situation right now with pay and all that stuff, but he was still a guy that they were kind of willing to let go. And I don't know that he is a lead back. I think the one guy on this team that profiles as a lead back would be Penny, but he can't stay healthy. So kind of going back to where you started, Bill, I think we're going to kind of see almost like when the Eagles had Westbrook and Buckhalter and who was the third guy in that?
Was it Deuce?
Deuce, yes. They had the three guys that they kind of rotated around. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw something more to that, but who knows? I think that's – and Saturday night, are you going to see these five guys, Trey Sermon, Boston Scott as well, are you going to see them carry the ball in preseason games? Are you going to risk getting Penny hurt in a preseason game, Swift hurt in a preseason? That's why I find Saturday night to be a little interesting with a position that's so in flux. Where do you get the answer to that question? In a preseason game, or are they going to wait till these practices against the Browns and then the Colts the following week?
What was it last year against the Browns? They ran the football 11 straight times. I think that's how they started out in their first possession. And I think it was mostly Boston Scott getting those carries, if I'm not mistaken. So maybe you'll see it again.
Yeah, and look, I think that Saturday would be interesting because somebody has to carry the ball. Now, it might be Kennedy Brooks, right? It could be Kennedy Brooks who gets 13 or 14 carries in that game. But you would think if you got five running backs on your roster, some of those five have to get touches in that game on Saturday night. So that is one area Saturday that I think the fans, we like to watch skill players. You know, we're not going to sit there fixated on who's playing. You know, well, right guard seems to be Cam Jurgens, but we're not going to sit there and be fixated on that. We want to see the skill position players and what those battles look like. I would imagine running back, you're going to get at least a chance to evaluate.
I know they used him all over the place in Detroit, but his role here in Philadelphia, I see as being more of a Darren Sproles with the lineup in the slot. But DeAndre Swift, I think Kenny Gainwell will get the most carries of the Eagles' backfield. But as far as the guy to get the most attempts for catches, the guy to be lined up and used the most in the most creative sense, I think it's going to be DeAndre Swift because of one thing that Nick Sirianni said. Well, two things. One, how Swift has been used throughout his career. And two, Nick Sirianni talking about the fact that he doesn't have running back hands. DeAndre Swift has wide receiver hands. He can catch the ball from any angle. How creative do you think they're going to get this year with DeAndre Swift?
You know, that's another, I think, wrinkle that we're waiting to see. By the way, Gainwell was a guy that was advertised to have great hands. He played wide receiver at Memphis, and then he came into the league, and the Eagles just don't use their backs in the backfield as receivers all that much. You know, it's weird because Miles Sanders had 50 catches his rookie season, and then he just vanished from the passing game. We haven't seen a receiver in Nick Sirianni's offense really get involved in the pass game. Now, why is that? We've had a lot of discussions. John and I have talked about this a lot. You know, by the time Hurts makes his progression, A.J. Brown's covered, nah. Smith is covered, nah. Goddard's covered, nah. You're not going to the fourth guy. You're taking off. So the running back is generally, unless they call a play that is set up to get the ball on some sort of screen or bubble or wheel route where you're looking at the running back first. I think that's why the running backs don't have a lot of catches in this offense. Are you going to throw the ball to A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, Dallas Goedert, or whoever's playing running back? Probably those other three guys first. So I find it interesting when Brian Johnson said, hey, we want to get the ball in the hands of the best players we got. And as he was making a general statement about the running backs catching the ball, because they said at Florida, his running backs caught the ball a lot there. Well, he probably had better running backs than he had pass catchers. So where do they fit on the chart? I don't anticipate seeing some guy catch. He's not going to be Austin Eckler catching 75 passes out of the backfield, I would imagine. Probably somewhere in that 30 to 40 range.
Let's stick to the running back room, Mike, real quick. So there's basically 5 guys probably competing for 4 spots. But you got Kenny Gainwell, 5'9", 200 pounds. DeAndre Swift, 5'9", 208. Boston Scott's only 5'6", 203. So the 2 big guys in that running back room are Rashad Penny, who's 5'11", 220. And then you have Trey Sermon, 6 feet, 215. Do you think Trey Sermon is going to have a role on this team? They kept him around all year last year on the active roster. They didn't want to risk putting him on the practice squad and another team picking him up. Do you think Trey Sermon makes this team?
He's an interesting guy because of his size, and you're right. You know what was the big, Mark, this where somebody says something in May, we're trying to take anything we can in May to be like, oh, Nick Sirianni mentioned, he said Trey Sermon's name. He didn't say anybody else's name, but he said Trey Sermon's name. What does that mean? Let's try to read the tea leaves on that. Could mean nothing. I mean, right now, Boston Scott, interestingly enough, is the highest paid running back on this team. So does that mean he's more inclined to stay? Or because he's the highest paid guy, does that mean he's more inclined to get cut? He also has the most experience of all the guys on this team. So do they feel like, hey, he's not our guy, but if somebody gets hurt, we know he can fill the role. He's kind of like that security blanket. So that's where Sermon might be the odd man out, because I can't imagine they keep all 5 of these guys. And if you're going to keep 4, I would think Scott would be the guy they feel more confident in, hey, this guy's missing 2 weeks. He's got a bad ankle, and Boston Scott knows the offense. Hopefully it falls against the Giants. That would be perfect. But if you just absolutely said, hey, for 2 weeks, I know I can trust him. I don't know about Trey Sermon. That's why I think he's probably a long shot to make the team. Now, what is Penny's role? Does Penny hold up? Do they say, you know what? We don't know that we could trust him. Does he get nicked up? Is he healthy between now and the cuts? That could be a big role, because if he somehow between now and then gets banged up and they're like, here we go again, maybe they feel more comfortable saying, you know what? He's always hurt. That's who he is. We're just going to move on from him, and we'll keep Sermon. So I think it's a fluid situation based on, believe it or not, these games, they might not have a lot of impact anymore, but there's a lot of things that happen in these joint practices that will determine who makes the team at running back.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. And to your point about Rashad Penny, I don't think there's any question how talented guy is when he's healthy. But I think one of the things the Eagles are going to do, and this goes to the point about why I think a guy like Kenny Gainwell is going to lead the team in carries, is because I think even if Rashad Penny's healthy, he's going to be healthy because they're not going to use him a lot. I don't want to use the term sparingly. They're going to slightly above, in case of emergency, break glass, and they'll access Rashad Penny to break off a big run, get in a goal line situation. They'll limit his production, but they'll still use his production.
Yeah, remember 2017 where you had LeGarrette Blount and he was kind of your guy, and then they got Jay Ajayi, and then they kind of figured out ways to use both of them, and Ajayi was running early in the games, and you got Blount kind of pounding out late. You might have Penny as the guy if you build up a lead. Hey, you're our fourth quarter guy. We don't want to use you a lot early in the game, but when push comes to shove, now you're going to have to go tackle Penny, who, by the way, I don't know too many running backs that get 6 yards a carry, and he's done it twice. Last year, he churns out 6 yards every time he touches the ball on average, and he did it a couple of years ago too. His problem has constantly been injuries. So if he can stay healthy and you can run out a fourth quarter clock, it's probably something that the Eagles might be thinking of. Hey, we don't want to use this guy first, second, third quarter, but when you have a lead late, you're going to have to bring the big man down. Good luck.
Yeah, we've been talking a lot about the offense, and I think we all agree offense is probably going to be in good shape regardless of who our running backs are. They're just so damn talented. But let's jump over to that defensive side of the ball, Mike. What concerns you the most on that defense? There's been a lot of change this offseason, defensive coordinator, linebackers, safety. What are you most concerned about over there?
Oh, man. They got a lot of new faces over there. You got a new coordinator. I know people did not like John Gannon. I was not the biggest John Gannon hater in the world. I say this often. As much as people didn't like Gannon, almost every player on defense last year had the best year they ever had in their career. Every single guy, for the most part, had a career year. I mean, Hassan Reddick, 18 and a half sacks. He didn't have 18 and a half sacks in Arizona. He didn't have 18 and a half sacks in Carolina. Edwards, Kaiser White, they both got deals. Marcus Epps, he got a deal. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson led the league in interceptions. He got a deal. Bradbury and Slay both had two of the best years they've ever had. Hargrave, he got a deal. You had a ton of guys having career years that you now have to replace. So I think that is – now, while we are excited about the guys who are here to replace them, I like Nakobe Dean a lot. Can he stay healthy? That's a big question that needs to be answered. They obviously don't like their linebacker room. They brought two guys in. I'm not sure those two guys are much of a help. We'll find out. Will they play on Saturday night? I think that's another interesting point. The safety room. You got Reed Blankenship leading the safety room right now. He was an undrafted free agent last year walking around out here, and now he's the guy. Interesting. Now, we hear a lot about this. Well, they're playing a lot of big nickel. So now you have three safeties you're going to put on the field out of a group of safeties. You can't identify one, and you're going to put more of them on the field. I think that's kind of interesting. What do we get from Jordan Davis? We're hearing good things. How are they going to use them? There's so many questions from a team that has so many new faces on that side, defensive side of the ball. And quite frankly, if you look at the Super Bowl and say, even if you love John Gannon, even if he was your brother, you would say, well, the defense didn't play great in that game. And now you've lost all those players who had career seasons here, and you're asking this defense, which was number 2 in the league last year, and people still hated the coordinator, and you're asking this defense to be better than the number 2 defense in football last year? I think that's a big ask.
It's a huge ask. Now let's go back. Let's go back a year. Okay, Mike. What if I told you? All right, I'm going to do a 30 for 30 here.
Yeah.
What if I told you at last year's training camp that Kayvon Wallace was going to be getting first-team reps next year at the safety position? Terrell Edmonds was going to be here. You were going to draft a guy like Sidney Brown, and those guys are now competing, those three, to be the starting safety next to that undrafted safety that you mentioned in Reed Blankenship, who I thought had a hell of a year last year. But Kayvon Wallace is very much in the mix to be the starting safety opposite Blankenship. Your thoughts, Mike Gill?
It's unfathomable to think that would be a possibility, right? I mean, look, if I was to give you a full expository on the safety room right now, you couldn't, because there's so many question marks in there. Hey, tell me about Terrell Edmonds. Well, he was drafted in the first round. He's been a pretty big disappointment. Pittsburgh didn't want him, and basically you're picking him up, and he's not shining in this room. Doesn't that kind of worry you a little bit to say, hey, here's a guy who's a first-round talent, started in Pittsburgh. You bring him into a room that has a guy, Justin Evans hasn't stepped on a field in like 4 years. He can't stay healthy. He's the Rashad Penny of safeties over there. You've got Sidney Brown, who obviously everybody wants to see play, but for some reason hasn't moved past the second spot on the depth chart, laying guys out Sunday night at practice, man. He was out there fishing for some exposure. So I think the safety room is a huge problem if Reed Blankenship's one of those guys, steady Eddie. He reminds me of last year. You had Marcus Epps. At this point, now this is something to keep in mind. At this point last year, Marcus Epps, can he be the best safety, a starting safety on a good team? I don't know. We didn't know what to expect from Marcus Epps. And I think the Eagles didn't know what to do either, so they went out and got Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. So I would imagine that they are still on their search. But if they don't find someone to upgrade, I think you've got a lot of questions, because Blankenship's one of those guys. He'll do his job. Go do your job. Okay, I'm not going to make mistakes. He's one of those guys. He doesn't make a play to help you, but he doesn't make a play to hurt you. So you're not getting playmaking ability from your safety. You're just kind of getting a steady Eddie. They got to find their Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, and I don't know that he's on this team right now. That's for sure. Do you guys see a Chauncey Gardner-Johnson playing that position? That guy had 6 picks last year. He led the league in interceptions. He missed 5 games.
Yeah, no, to answer your question, I don't. Bill, I don't know about you, but I don't see that yet.
How important is it to have that guy? Mm-hmm. Like when on a team that doesn't have a lot of playmaking at linebacker, somebody has to be a playmaker, and they don't have them right now.
Well, let's talk about something positive with that defense because it's all been negative, but let's talk about something positive. That defensive line looks like they are extremely deep. So they had 70 sacks last year, set a team record, come too shy of the NFL record. Do you see them having a chance with the additions of Jalen Carter, Nolan Smith, being able to come close or even surpass those 70 sacks they had last year?
It's a tough ask, man. Again, you're everybody's frustrated with the coordinator because he didn't blitz enough. And I don't know that you're going to see Sean Desai blitz any more than John Gadden did because he probably has a similar mindset. We have guys up front that can get the job done. Javon Hargrave, double-digit sacks. Brandon Graham had more sacks than another guy had a career year, by the way. Brandon Graham had more sacks last year than he ever had in his career. Are you going to ask Brandon Graham again to have double-digit sacks a year older? I think that's hard to kind of fathom. Josh Sweat, another guy, had a big career year last year. Is Josh Sweat the guy that we saw last year? Is he somewhere right below that? Is he still peaking? I think that needs to be questioned. How much you getting from Jalen Carter? Hassan Reddick had 18.5 sacks last year. He getting more than that? That's a big ask, don't we think? I mean, even if he gets 15.5, every guy has to either match or surpass what they did a year ago. I think that's a pretty big ask. So to see this team getting that many sacks, I got to say, I think it's pretty far-fetched, which means you got to have some more talent on the back end. If you're not getting as much on the front as you got a year ago and the people still complained, how are you going to compensate by having less on the back end? Keep in mind, Slay, a year older. I'm not saying he's cooked, but he's a year older. Bradbury's a year older. You got questions at safety. You don't have TJ Edwards. Kaiser White was a very solid linebacker for this team that I think people just kind of took for granted. Now he's gone. You're asking Nakobe Dean to do a lot, man, in that spot, and I don't know who's playing next to him. So, again, if you can't get 70 sacks, you better be better on that back end, and I don't know that that's the case.
Real quick, I want to get this in. It is officially that time of year, guys, where Nick Sirianni, right before the first preseason game, says he doesn't know if he's going to play his starters or not. So that's where we're at. That's according to his press conference. People are tweeting that out right now. So it's pretty much par for the course. Secondly, I want to flip it back on the offensive side of the football for you, Mike. Last question for me. Is this, we're kicking this around, Bill and I, is this the most athletic offensive line you can remember in Eagles history in terms of guys that'll be able to get off the line of scrimmage and make blocks downfield?
Oh, I mean, Lane Johnson was a quarterback. Cam Jurgens played tight end. Didn't Jurgens, wasn't he a tight end originally?
Tight end.
He moved him to center. Landon Dickerson, he's a guy who can play up and down the line. Mailata. My Mailata thing is funny. Like, maybe it's funny to me. I don't know. But who looked at that guy? He's out there just running dudes over. Not that I'm asking him to play running back. But I look at this guy and say, who said he's a left? Like, I would have looked at that guy and said, he's playing defensive tackle, and he is just running through the defense. Who's blocking him? Who is blocking Jordan Mailata if you put him at, like, Aaron Donald D tackle? He would have been the biggest menace ever on defense at his size, speed, and explosion. So to answer your question alone, Mailata himself is the most athletic, makes this line the most athletic. But, yeah, up and down the line, I mean, you're taking a look at, Kelsey, of all the guys, I don't want to say he's the most unathletic because most people think he is the athletic, but everybody else pretty much played a skill position. Probably Dickerson would be the guy who would be the least athletic of that crew, and that's saying how athletic that this bunch is because Dickerson's a bad dude.
So, Mike, before you run, though, I got to know. We'll change gears for a second. The Brian Prop jersey behind you, the Gaffa, right? That the Gaffa?
Yeah. It's signed by the entire 1987 Flyers Stanley Cup finalist team.
Wow, that is awesome. Man. That is fantastic, man.
Yeah,
Mike,
dropping me Halliday back there. By the way, no hitters are galore right now. No hitters are the thing. Halliday, baby. I was at that game, 2010.
Oh wow, that's awesome, man. No, it was incredible. It's such a great night in Philadelphia. You had a training camp fight and a no hitter in the same day. I mean, come on.
And the man hits a home run in his first ever major league at bat in the day. And Castellanos, by the way, hit his 200th home run last night. That got lost in the sauce.
It was one of the more magical nights in Philadelphia sports history with all the things going on there in South Philly. Mike Gill, ESPN 97.3 South Jersey. Our man, Mike, always great catching up with you, man. Thank you so much.
See you guys.
Have a good one, brother.
The great Mike Gill joining us right there on Birds 365. And in the words of Jody McDonald, Phil, when we come back, you know what we're going to do? We're going to put a bow on it. We're going to put a bow on it. Coming up in a little bit, we'll wrap up Birds 365. We'll be right back.